I've recently been using the word this as a symbol and reminder of the ever seamless now. It seems to bring clarity on what's happening and in turn seems to dissolve the illusory self. Do you have any thoughts on that word or the use of it? Thanks. If that's what floats your boat or works, then that's beautiful. If that seemingly dissolves things. What you're doing is you're doing a practice. The person is doing a practice. So I recommend doing the I am practice, but you're doing a this practice, and that's just as good. It's basically bringing the personal awareness back to the present moment. So you're putting the personal awareness into the attention. So into the attention of what's happening. My friend used to say, put the attention in the attention. I quite like that. So you're putting the attention in the attention. So you're putting the personal awareness in itself and trying to stay present rather than drifting off into thoughts and ideas and illusions. And that's super helpful for the person. Know that consciousness is watching that. So that's not you going back to the absolute. The consciousness is conscious of that. So any movement that's happening in the world is a personal movement. But it's really good that the person does that because it's stopping it going out into so many of its illusions. And then at some point, something else presents itself, like grace presents itself. So there is a shift from being identified with that person to this absolute looking. This is it. So if this works, go for it. You can investigate, what feels insecure with that. It's super healthy to do it. A lot of teachers recommend it, and you can feel the healthiness of it. It can also be painful because the ego wants to get lost in its stories. It wants to keep going into what it's deficient of, what's wrong with it, what's its problems, it's whose fault it is, why you're unhappy. And so coming back to this moment, the ego is like, or the thinking mind is like, a bit like a minion, like one of the minion memes that was like, they're so disturbing memes sometimes, like the way they repeat themselves. But it's kind of like that, the mind. So it's it's insidious. So it is painful. Keep putting the attention back in presence and this. We're not talking about a disembodied this, and we're not talking about disassociating. When you come back to this, it's totally embracing everything that's happening in the body. So what the mind is doing is actually trying to avoid what's happening in the body. It's all so complicated and hard to explain. So the person is made up of relationships. So the illusory self is made up of the relationship. And the first relationship is that I'm a person in here relating to a person out there. And then there's a relationship with your computer, with your kitchen, with food, with your animals, with the sunlight, with the grass, with gardening, with your work. So everything becomes a relationship. And the problem with relationships in our society, so the human relationships in our society, which then go into work and your goals, your dreams, is that most relationships are very dysfunctional. Like if you've ever gone down the path of therapy, you begin to realize like how dysfunctional relationships are, because most people aren't being authentic, they're playing a game. And then you get people that are playing the game from an abusive perspective, from a manipulative perspective, and then you get the perspective of people that are just playing a game from a very unconscious perspective, but they're not trying to abuse or get power, but they're just very unconscious about what's happening. And these games that everybody's playing with each other are so complex and confusing, and everybody's not being honest, but they don't know they're not being honest because it's happening on a subconscious level. So the problem is because your sense of self is based on relationship, your sense of self is kind of a bit crazy. Like, it has crazy ideas about things and dysfunctional ways of relating. So when you start doing this presence thing, it's also making you come back to what you felt prior to this ego being grown. So prior to this illusory ego being grown. And then on top of that, it's got all the discomfort from the illusory ego. So there's like a lot of discomfort that appears in the body. So the mind is like, get me out of here, alarm bells. It was like when I phoned the emergency service by accident just before this talk. It's like, get me out of here, beep, 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 problem. Because not only has it got the discomfort of what it feels in this moment from whatever it's narrating, it's got the discomfort from all these bizarre relationships and untruths and lies it's been telling itself since it was born. And people aren't conscious of this, so they're not conscious that in a relationship they're seeking to get love from a person. And through not being conscious of this and through having this dynamic, they start playing out all types of bizarre things. They need to get that person's attention, so they start creating art or painting things in order to show off and get this person's attention, or they start really exaggerating who they are, trying to be funny, all types of things in order to get this attention from the person that they love, or they want to love them, or they want to like them. And through that, then that affects the other person, and then the other person has all their prejudice, all their ideas, all their conditions, and all their responses coming up. And then there's this like game of discomfort that's happening. And this is happening in most relationships, and you're projecting it onto all inanimate objects as well. So a lot of people, what they do is they just get, by the end of the day, they're so confused and so uncomfortable, they just drink lots of alcohol just to numb it out. Or they really disassociate from their body because they can't cope with the discrepancy. But what it does is it makes you dead, and it makes suffering, and it makes the mind go crazy, like never stop. It's like bip, 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 bip. Because in order to stay out of the body and out of the feelings, the mind has to work overtime. So putting the attention back in the I am, or in this, I mean, it can be rather uncomfortable in the beginning, and that can last for many years. I mean, some Buddhists would even say lifetimes, because there's a lot of discomfort to sit through and accept and not act out of and try to divert. Then what happens at some point is that dense cloud of all the illusions of the mind separates enough, and then the light of who you are, the consciousness and the I am, sees itself again. It recognizes who it is, and then there is a shift energetically. And then after that realization, then there is an integration, because the person has a habit, a momentum of a way of being, but now there's a different way of seeing, so it changes the person. Yeah. So it's intense, like this subject is intense, waking up is intense, and sometimes I think I make it seem like it's really easy, but it's not. It's difficult. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do in this life. It's way harder than becoming rich.